In the unforgiving heat of 1867 Arizona territory, 15-year-old Catalina has been sold 3 times by families who couldn't accept her mixed Apache and Mexican heritage, until a grieving widower named Benjamin Wade sees something in her that no one else could. When an Apache war party threatens their newfound bond and suspicious neighbors demand her removal, Catalina must discover whether her worth lies in the color of her skin or the courage of her heart. But will she choose to stay and fight for the family she's always dreamed of? Or will fear drive her back to the very people who rejected her father's blood? The scorching Arizona sun made everything shimmer like a dream, but 15-year-old Catalina knew this was no dream. It was another nightmare about to begin. She pressed her ear against the wooden door of the trading post, listening to the voices that would decide her fate once again. "She's too dark," Martha Henley whispered to her husband. "The neighbors keep staring. Mrs. Peterson asked me straight out why we're keeping an Indian girl in our home." Catalina's heart sank like a stone thrown into deep water. She had heard these words before in different voices in different towns. Always the same ending. Jacob Henley's boots creaked across the floor. "We paid good money for her 2 years ago. Thought she'd work out better than the others. Well, she hasn't. Look at her. She's getting older, more noticeable. People talk, Jacob. They say we're Indian lovers." The girl slumped against the wall, her brown hands trembling. 3 families had owned her since she was 13. Each time, the same story. Each time, the same rejection. Her Apache father's blood ran too strong in her veins, they said. Her Mexican mother's features too obvious in her face. "There's a man coming today," Jacob said. "Benjamin Wade. He's looking for help on his ranch." What kind of man buys a girl like her? The desperate kind. His wife and son died last winter. He needs someone to cook and clean. Catalina closed her eyes. Another buyer. Another chance to be thrown away like yesterday's bread. Through the cracked window, dust swirled in the street like tiny tornadoes. Mexican traders haggled with Apache women over silver jewelry. White settlers hurried past with suspicious glances. This was Tucson in 1867, a place where 3 worlds crashed together but never truly mixed. A horse's hooves clattered outside. Catalina peeked through the shutters and saw a man climbing down from his saddle. He moved slowly, like someone carrying invisible weight on his shoulders. His clothes were clean but patched, his hat worn but cared for. Unlike the other men who had bought her, this one didn't look around with greedy eyes, measuring everything for its worth. "That must be him," Martha hissed. "Go wash your face, girl. Try to look presentable." Catalina splashed cold water from the basin onto her cheeks, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror. Dark skin that marked her as different. Black hair that curled despite her efforts to tame it. Eyes that had seen too much for someone so young. The door opened with a squeal of rusty hinges. Benjamin Wade stepped inside, removing his hat to reveal gray-streaked hair and lines carved deep by sun and sorrow. His eyes swept the room and found her immediately. "You must be Catalina," he said quietly. She nodded, surprised he knew her name. Most buyers just called her the girl. Jacob stepped forward, rubbing his hands together. "Mr. Wade, glad you could make it. As I mentioned in my letter, she's strong for her size. Good with her hands. Martha's taught her to cook and sew." "What I want to know," Benjamin said, his voice steady as stone, "is why you're selling her." The question hung in the air like smoke from a campfire. Martha shifted uncomfortably, glancing at her husband. "Well, you see, it's difficult to explain. Try me." Jacob cleared his throat. "The truth is, she doesn't fit in well with decent folk. Her breeding, you understand. Half Apache, half Mexican. Makes people nervous." Benjamin's gray eyes never left Catalina's face. "Makes them nervous, how?" "They worry about loyalties, where her heart really lies. Whether she can be trusted around Christian families." "And what do you think?" The question caught Jacob off guard. Well, she's never given us trouble exactly. But people talk, Mr. Wade. They see her and think of raids, of violence. It's not good for business." Catalina watched Benjamin's jaw tighten almost too slightly to notice. He turned to her directly. "What do you think about all this, Catalina?" No one had ever asked her opinion before. The words stuck in her throat like thorns. I don't know what to say, sir. You must have thoughts about being sold like a sack of grain." His bluntness made Martha gasp, but Catalina felt something stir inside her chest. Not hope, exactly, but something close to it. "I think," she said carefully, "that I've never had much choice in the matter." Benjamin nodded as if her answer made perfect sense. "Fair enough." He turned back to Jacob. "You're asking $50? That's right. Cheap for a girl her age who can work. I'll give you 25. Now see here. 25, and that's only because I figure she'll need clothes and supplies." Benjamin's voice carried an edge that made Jacob step back. "You want to get rid of her so badly, that's my offer." Martha tugged on her husband's sleeve. "Take it, Jacob. We need her gone before the church social next week." The haggling that followed felt different from the other times Catalina had been sold. Benjamin Wade didn't poke at her teeth or check her arms for strength. He didn't ask about her monthly bleeding or whether she could bear children someday. He simply waited, patient as the desert rocks, while the Henleys convinced themselves they were getting a fair deal. When the money changed hands, Catalina felt the familiar hollow sensation in her stomach. Another owner, another chance to disappoint, another countdown to the day she'd be sold again. But as Benjamin Wade gathered her few belongings, a spare dress, a hairbrush, and a small wooden cross her mother had carved years ago, something in his manner gave her pause. He handled her things gently, as if they mattered, as if she mattered. "Ready?" he asked. Catalina took one last look around the trading post that had been her prison for the past 3 months. Through the window, she could see his wagon waiting in the street, loaded with supplies for the journey ahead. She had no idea where he was taking her or what kind of life awaited her there. But for the first time in years, the unknown didn't terrify her quite as much as the known. The wagon wheels found every rock and rut in the dusty trail leading north from Tucson, jolting Catalina's bones with each bump. She gripped the wooden seat to keep from sliding into Benjamin Wade's lap, stealing glances at his weathered profile when she thought he wasn't looking. He hadn't spoken a word since they'd left town an hour ago. The silence stretched between them like a taut rope, ready to snap. Catalina had learned that quiet men were often the most dangerous. Their anger came without warning, swift and brutal as summer lightning. She pressed herself against the far edge of the wagon seat, watching the desert roll past in waves of brown and gold. "You scared of me?" Benjamin asked suddenly. The question startled her. And no, sir. Good liar. But I can see you trembling from here." Catalina's cheeks burned. She hadn't realized her fear was so obvious. "The other families," she said carefully, "they didn't much like talking to me. Thought it was better if I stayed quiet." Benjamin made a sound that might have been a laugh or a snort. "Well, that's a shame. Gets mighty lonely out here without conversation." He guided the horses around a cluster of barrel cactus, their spines glinting like needles in the afternoon sun. In the distance, mountains rose like sleeping giants against the pale sky. "You got a preference for what you're called?" he asked. Another question no one had ever bothered to ask. "Catalina. Sometimes Cat. Catalina's a pretty name." "Spanish?" She nodded. "My mother was from Sonora. Came north when she was young." "And your father?" The words stuck in her throat like bitter medicine. Her father was the reason she'd been sold 3 times, the reason decent families couldn't stand the sight of her. "Apache," she whispered. Benjamin's hands never tightened on the reins. His expression never changed. "Strong people, the Apache. Survivors." Catalina stared at him in amazement. Strong people? Survivors? Every white person she'd ever known spat when they mentioned the Apache. They called them savages, demons, worse than animals. "You're not afraid of that?" "Of what?" "That you might know how to track game or find water in the desert. That you might understand the land better than most folks." Benjamin shook his head. "Sounds more like advantages than problems to me." The wagon hit another deep rut, And this time Catalina didn't pull away when her shoulder bumped against his. Maybe this man was different. Maybe. She caught herself before the hope could take root. Hope was dangerous. Hope led to disappointment, and disappointment led to the kind of pain that left permanent scars. "What kind of work will you expect from me?" she asked instead. "Whatever needs doing. Cooking, cleaning, mending. Maybe help with the cattle if you're willing." "I don't know anything about cattle. Neither did I when I started. Had to learn everything the hard way." He glanced at her with something that might have been kindness. "Anna, that was my wife. She always said the best education comes from making mistakes and learning from them." "Is your wife? Will she be teaching me?" Benjamin's face went still as carved stone. "Anna died last winter. Pneumonia took her, same as it took our boy." The words hit Catalina like cold water. She had assumed he was married, that she'd be working for another stern-faced woman who'd find fault with everything she did. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Danny was about your age, 15. Had his whole life ahead of him. Benjamin's voice grew rough around the edges. "Lost them both within 2 weeks. Sometimes I wonder why the good Lord saw fit to take them and leave me behind." Catalina didn't know what to say to such naked grief. In her experience, adults kept their pain locked away behind angry words and hard faces. This man's sorrow sat right on the surface, raw and honest as an open wound. "Must be hard," she offered. "Taking care of everything by yourself. Near impossible, truth be told. Can't seem to manage the simplest things anymore. That's why I need help." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the desert gradually giving way to rolling hills dotted with scrub oak and pine. The air grew cooler as they climbed higher, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. "Those people back there," Benjamin said eventually. "The Henleys, they treat you decent." Catalina considered lying, then decided the truth might be safer. "Better than some, worse than others." "That's not really an answer. They fed me, gave me a place to sleep, didn't hit me much." Benjamin's knuckles went white on the reins. "Much? Only when I did something wrong. Or when Martha was having one of her difficult days." "What constituted doing something wrong?" "Speaking Apache words in my sleep. Looking too long at the church during Sunday service. Braiding my hair the way my mother taught me." She shrugged. "Existing, mostly." The wagon slowed to a stop. Benjamin set the brake and turned to face her fully, his gray eyes burning with quiet fury. "Let me make something clear, Catalina. I bought you from those people because you needed help, and I needed help. But I didn't buy you to own you. You're not my property, you're—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Your family now. At least, that's what I'm hoping for. Family." The word hit her like lightning, illuminating corners of her heart she'd thought were dead. "Family doesn't hit each other for speaking their mother's language," he continued. "Family doesn't make you ashamed of who you are or where you came from. Family protects each other." Tears threatened to spill down Catalina's cheeks. She blinked them back furiously, afraid to believe what she was hearing. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you want me for family when my own people didn't?" Benjamin picked up the reins again, but his voice remained gentle. "Maybe because I know what it feels like to be thrown away. Maybe because empty houses need filling, and empty hearts need mending." He clicked his tongue at the horses, and they resumed their steady pace. "Or maybe because some things are just meant to be, and we're too foolish to argue with fate." As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Catalina allowed herself to imagine what it might feel like to belong somewhere, to someone, to have a name that meant more than just another mouth to feed or another burden to bear. But even as hope began to uncurl in her chest like a flower reaching for sunlight, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered warnings. She had been disappointed before. She had been rejected before. And she had learned that the higher you dared to climb, the farther you had to fall. Still, as Benjamin Wade's wagon carried her toward an uncertain future, Catalina found herself wondering, what if this time was different? A rattlesnake coiled in the wagon's path made the horses rear and scream, their hooves pawing at the desert air like they were fighting invisible demons. Catalina grabbed Benjamin's arm as the wagon lurched sideways, wheels spinning dangerously close to the rocky edge of the trail. "Easy, easy," Benjamin shouted, pulling hard on the reins while the snake slithered away into the brush, its warning rattle fading into silence. When the horses finally settled, both human passengers sat breathing hard in the sudden quiet. Catalina realized she was still gripping Benjamin's sleeve and quickly let go. "Sorry," she mumbled. "Nothing to apologize for. That was closer than I like." Benjamin wiped sweat from his forehead with his bandana. "You handled it well. Most folks would have jumped right out of the wagon." "Where would I jump to out here?" Her practical response made him chuckle, and the sound surprised them both. When had either of them last found something to laugh about? They continued northward as the sun climbed higher, the landscape gradually changing from flat desert to rolling hills. Catalina noticed more trees now, scrub oak and juniper clinging to rocky slopes, their shadows offering brief respites from the heat. "How much farther?" she asked. "Another hour, maybe 2. Depends on whether we run into more surprises." As if summoned by his words, the sound of gunshots echoed from somewhere ahead, sharp cracks that made both horses' ears twitch forward nervously. Benjamin immediately pulled the wagon off the main trail, guiding it behind a cluster of large boulders. "Stay down," he whispered, reaching for the rifle tucked beneath the wagon seat. Catalina's heart hammered against her ribs. Apache raids were common in this territory, but so were bandits who robbed travelers. Either way, being caught in the open could mean death. The gunshots came again, closer now. Through gaps in the rocks, they could see dust clouds rising from the trail ahead. Multiple riders moving fast. "Can you shoot?" Benjamin asked quietly. Catalina nodded. Her father had taught her to handle a rifle before the soldiers came for him, before her world fell apart. Benjamin handed her a smaller weapon that must have belonged to his wife. The wooden stock felt smooth and familiar in her hands, awakening memories she tried to bury. The riders burst around the bend. 5 men on horseback, chasing something or someone. They wore no uniforms, which meant they weren't cavalry. Their clothes were dirty and mismatched, their horses lathered with sweat. Behind them, struggling on foot, came a young Apache boy, maybe 12 years old, limping badly, blood staining his torn shirt. The men were hunting him like an animal. "Please!" the boy gasped in Spanish as he stumbled past their hiding place. "Help me!" Catalina's breath caught. She recognized him, Running Wolf, son of a war chief named Stone Bear. She had played with him as a small child, before her world divided into us and them. "Keep running," she whispered in Apache. "Follow the dry creek bed north." The boy's eyes widened when he heard his native tongue, but he obeyed, disappearing into the brush just as the riders thundered past. "Where'd he go?" one of the men shouted. "Tracks lead this way," another replied. "Little Savage can't have gone far with that bullet in his leg." They dismounted, spreading out to search the rocky terrain. One of them, a man with a scraggly beard and mean eyes, walked directly toward their hiding spot. Benjamin raised his rifle, but Catalina placed a gentle hand on his arm. Instead, she stood up slowly, making herself visible. "Afternoon," she called out in her friendliest voice. The bearded man spun around, his own weapon half raised. Well, what have we here?" "Just travelers, sir. Heading north." The other men gathered around, studying her with the kind of attention that made her skin crawl. They saw her dark hair, her brown skin, her mixed features. "You wouldn't happen to have seen a young buck running through here, would you?" the leader asked. "Apache boy wounded. He's wanted for stealing horses." Catalina kept her expression blank. "Innocent. Haven't seen anyone except you gentlemen." "That's so?" The man stepped closer, his stench of whiskey and unwashed clothes making her want to gag. "Funny thing is, I could swear I heard someone speaking Indian talk just now." "Must have been the wind," Catalina said. "Plays tricks on you out here in the desert." The man's eyes narrowed. He clearly didn't believe her, but he also couldn't prove anything. After a long moment, He spat in the dirt near her feet. You be careful, girl. This territory's dangerous for folks who help the wrong people. The threat hung in the air like smoke as the men mounted their horses and rode away, still searching for Running Wolf's trail. Only when their dust cloud disappeared over the next ridge did Benjamin emerge from behind the rocks. That was brave, he said quietly. And foolish. The boy's just a child. Those men would have killed us both if they'd found him here. Catalina looked toward the brush where Running Wolf had vanished. Some things are worth the risk. Benjamin studied her face for a long moment, seeing something there that seemed to surprise him. Your father taught you more than just shooting, didn't he? He taught me that we all bleed the same color, no matter what we look like on the outside. They climbed back into the wagon, but the mood had shifted. The easy conversation of earlier was replaced by thoughtful silence. Catalina wondered if Benjamin was having second thoughts about bringing her to his home. Helping Apache children was exactly the kind of thing that had gotten her sold before. You thinking you made a mistake? She asked as they rejoined the main trail. About what? About me. About what you just saw. Benjamin guided the horses around a washout, considering his words carefully. I'm thinking, he said finally, that I've been living with ghosts for too long. Maybe it's time I started living with someone who remembers what it means to be alive. The Wade homestead appeared as they crested a low hill. A small adobe house with a tin roof, corrals for cattle, and a well that looked like the most valuable thing for miles around. It wasn't much compared to the grand houses where she'd worked before, but something about it felt different. Felt like it could become home. As Benjamin helped her down from the wagon, Catalina noticed details that told stories. A woman's garden gone to weeds, a child's wooden horse lying forgotten by the front door, laundry hanging stiff and brittle on a line. Anna planted those vegetables, Benjamin said, following her gaze. Haven't had the heart to tend them since she passed. And the toy, Danny's, carved it myself for his 10th birthday. His voice grew thick. Figured I'd put it away eventually, but somehow I never get around to it. Catalina picked up the little horse, running her fingers over the smooth wood. She could see the love carved into every detail. The flowing mane, the proud stance, the careful attention to proportion. It's beautiful, she said. He loved that thing. Carried it everywhere until his friends started teasing him about being too old for toys. They stood together in the failing light, two wounded souls surrounded by the remnants of other people's lives. The silence wasn't uncomfortable now. It was the quiet of understanding, of shared loss. I'll help you with the garden, Catalina said. If you want. Benjamin looked at her with something that might have been gratitude. I'd like that. As they unloaded the wagon and settled the horses for the night, Catalina felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The possibility of belonging. Not as property or burden, but as family. But even as hope began to take root in her heart, she couldn't shake the memory of those hostile riders, or the knowledge that her very presence might bring danger to this kind man who'd already lost so much. Catalina woke to the sound of cattle lowing in distress, their calls echoing across the pre-dawn darkness like cries for help. She sat up on her bedroll. Benjamin had insisted she take the house while he slept in the barn until he could build a proper second room, and listened carefully. Something was wrong. She dressed quickly and crept outside, her bare feet silent on the packed earth. The moon hung like a silver coin in the star-scattered sky, providing just enough light to see shapes moving near the corral. Too many shapes. Too quiet. Cattle thieves. Her heart hammered as she counted the shadowy figures. At least 4 men working to cut out the best animals from Benjamin's small herd. They moved with practiced efficiency, clearly experienced at this deadly business. She had 2 choices. Wake Benjamin and risk a gunfight that might get them both killed, or try something else. Something her Apache father had taught her about patience and strategy. Catalina slipped back into the house and gathered what she needed. A handful of dried beans, a metal pot, and Benjamin's hunting horn. Then she circled wide around the thieves, using every trick her father had shown her about moving unseen across rough ground. From her hiding spot behind the well, she waited until the thieves had successfully separated 6 head of cattle from the main herd. At exactly the right moment, She threw the beans hard against the metal roof of the barn. The sharp, rattling sound sent the nervous cattle into a panic. They scattered in all directions, bellowing and crashing into fences. The thieves' horses spooked, rearing and dancing as their riders fought to regain control. In the chaos, Catalina blew the hunting horn with all her strength. 3 long blasts that shattered the night silence like thunder. "What in hell?" one of the thieves shouted. "Apache war party," another yelled. "They're surrounding us." The sound of the horn echoing off the rocky hills made it impossible to tell where it was coming from. To men already nervous about Indian raids, it must have seemed like they were surrounded by invisible warriors. Benjamin burst from the barn, rifle in hand, just as the thieves abandoned their plans and spurred their horses toward the hills. They disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind only hoof prints and the echo of their panicked retreat. "What happened?" Benjamin demanded, spinning in circles as he tried to make sense of the scene. Catalina emerged from her hiding spot, holding the horn and grinning. "Cattle thieves. I convinced them they were outnumbered." "You?" Benjamin stared at her in amazement. "You scared off for armed men by yourself. My father used to say that fear is stronger than bullets, if you know how to use it." They spent the next hour rounding up the scattered cattle, working together in comfortable silence. Benjamin's respect for her was obvious in the way he followed her suggestions about which animals to approach first, how to calm the most nervous cows. When the sun finally rose, painting the desert in shades of gold and red, they sat on the porch sharing coffee and watching their herd graze peacefully. "Those men will probably come back," Catalina said. "Maybe with more friends." "Most likely." Benjamin sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "Though they might think twice if they believe there are Apache watching the place." "There might be." He looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" Catalina hesitated, then decided honesty was safer than secrets. "The boy we helped yesterday running wolf. His father is Stone Bear, a war chief. If word reaches him about what happened, he might come looking for the men who hurt his son. Or he might come looking for the people who helped him." Benjamin considered this. "Good or bad? Depends on how you look at it. Apache don't forget debts, but they don't forget enemies either." They were interrupted by the sound of horses approaching from the south. Catalina tensed, wondering if the cattle thieves had returned with reinforcements, but these riders moved differently, steady and deliberate rather than sneaky. 3 men on horseback emerged from the morning heat shimmer, and Catalina's heart sank as she recognized the leader. Sheriff Morrison, a man who made no secret of his hatred for anyone with Indian blood. "Morning, Wade," Morrison called out as he dismounted. "Heard you had some trouble last night." "Nothing I couldn't handle," Benjamin replied carefully. "That's so?" Morrison's pale eyes found Catalina and narrowed. "Interesting that you'd acquire an Indian girl right before Apache start making noise in the territory." "She's not Indian, she's Mexican," Benjamin lied smoothly. "And what noise would that be?" "Don't play dumb. We found tracks near the Morrison ranch yesterday, unshod horses, moccasin prints. Someone's been scouting our defenses." Catalina forced herself to remain calm, even though she could feel the sheriff's suspicion like heat from a fire. Morrison was the kind of man who saw enemies everywhere, especially enemies with brown skin. "Well, I haven't seen any Apache," Benjamin said. "Have you, Catalina?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. Morrison stepped closer, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. "Funny thing about Indian raids, they always seem to happen near places where half-breeds are working. Makes a man wonder about loyalties." "The only loyalty that matters here," Benjamin said quietly, "is family loyalty, and Catalina is family." The word hit Morrison like a physical blow. His face reddened with anger and disgust. "Family? Wade, have you lost your mind? That girl's got savage blood. You can't trust her any more than you can trust a rattlesnake." "I trust her more than I trust most white folks," Benjamin replied. "She's got more honor in her little finger than some people have in their whole body." The insult was clear, and Morrison's hand moved closer to his weapon. For a tense moment, Violence hung in the air like the threat of lightning. Then one of Morrison's men cleared his throat nervously. "Sheriff, we should probably check on the other ranches, make sure everyone's prepared." Morrison glared at Benjamin for another long moment before mounting his horse. "You're making a mistake, Wade. Mark my words. That girl will bring you nothing but trouble." As the three men rode away, Catalina felt tears prick her eyes. The same pattern was beginning again. Suspicion, fear, rejection. How long before Benjamin decided she wasn't worth the risk? "Don't," he said quietly. "Don't what?" "Don't start thinking you're not wanted here. Morrison's an ignorant fool who sees enemies in every shadow." "But what if he's right? What if I do bring trouble to your door?" Benjamin turned to face her fully, his gray eyes serious. "Catalina, listen to me carefully. Trouble's been knocking on my door since the day Anna and Danny died. Loneliness is trouble. Despair is trouble. Having nothing left to live for, that's the worst trouble of all." He gestured toward the well-tended cattle, the repaired fences, the garden where green shoots were already pushing through the dark soil. "You've brought life back to this place. You've given me reason to get up in the morning. If that comes with risk, so be it." As they watched the sheriff's dust cloud disappear over the horizon, Catalina realized something important. For the first time in her life, someone was willing to fight for her. Not because they owned her, not because they felt sorry for her, but because they chose to see her as family. The knowledge was both wonderful and terrifying, because now she had something to lose. 6 Apache warriors materialized from the desert rocks like spirits given form, their painted faces and silent horses appearing so suddenly that Catalina dropped the bucket of water she'd been carrying to the garden. The metal clattered against stone, the only sound breaking the deadly quiet that had fallen over the Wade homestead. Stone Bear himself led the group, his scarred face marking him as a chief who'd survived many battles. Running Wolf sat behind him on the same horse, his wounded leg wrapped in clean bandages. The boy's eyes found Catalina immediately, and he whispered something to his father in rapid Apache. Benjamin emerged from the barn, moving slowly with his hands visible and empty. He'd learned enough about Apache customs to know that sudden movements could mean death for them both. "Stone Bear," he said respectfully, inclining his head. The war chief's dark eyes studied Benjamin for a long moment before shifting to Catalina. When he spoke, it was in accented but clear English. "My son tells me you helped him when the white men hunted him like an animal." Catalina's throat felt dry as sand. "He was hurt. It was the right thing to do." "The right thing." Stone Bear repeated the words as if tasting them. "Many of your people would not agree. I'm not like many of my people." This drew a thin smile from the Apache leader. "No, you are not." He dismounted with fluid grace, his warriors remaining mounted but alert. "Running Wolf also tells me you spoke our language. How is this possible?" The question Catalina had dreaded her entire life. The truth that had gotten her sold 3 times, rejected by every family who tried to claim her. "My father was Apache," she said quietly. "Broken Arrow, from the band that hunted near Tucson." Stone Bear's entire demeanor changed. His eyes widened, and he stepped closer, studying her face with new intensity. "Broken Arrow was my cousin," he said softly. "I thought all his family had died when the soldiers came." The world seemed to tilt under Catalina's feet. Family. Real family, not the kind that came with purchase papers, but blood family she'd never known existed. "He never spoke of relatives," she whispered, "because he thought we were all dead." Stone Bear's voice carried deep sadness. "The attack on our winter camp scattered many families. For years, we believed the same of him." Benjamin watched this reunion with growing unease. He'd seen enough of Apache justice to know that blood ties could be both blessing and curse. "What do you want from us?" he asked carefully. Stone Bear turned his attention back to the white man who'd bought his cousin's daughter. "That depends. Are you her owner or her protector?" "I'm her father," Benjamin said without hesitation. "By choice and by law." "And what does she choose?" All eyes turned to Catalina. The moment felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that her next words would determine whether she fell or learned to fly. "I choose both," she said finally. "Stone Bear is my blood family, and Benjamin is my heart family. I won't abandon either." The Apache warriors exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Running Wolf whispered something urgent to his father, but Stone Bear raised a hand for silence. "The white man's law does not recognize such divisions," he said. "You are either Apache or you are not." "Then I guess I'm something new," Catalina replied. "Something that doesn't fit in anyone's neat little boxes." Stone Bear studied her for a long moment, then did something unexpected. He laughed. The sound was rusty, as if he didn't use it often, but genuine. "You have your father's stubborn spirit," he said. "Broken Arrow would be proud." Relief flooded through Catalina like cool water. But before she could respond, the sound of approaching horses echoed from the south. Many horses moving fast. Sheriff Morrison's voice carried across the desert before they could see him. "There they are! I told you Wade was harboring hostiles." The peaceful gathering exploded into chaos. The Apache warriors wheeled their horses, hands moving to weapons. Benjamin grabbed his rifle from where it leaned against the barn wall. Catalina found herself caught in the middle as two worlds prepared for war. "Wait!" she shouted. But her voice was lost in the noise of men shouting orders and horses screaming. Morrison and 6 deputies thundered into the yard, guns drawn. The sheriff's face was twisted with the kind of righteous anger that made reasonable men do terrible things. "Step away from those savages, Wade," Morrison commanded. "We've got them surrounded." "These men came in peace," Benjamin called back, his rifle aimed at the ground but ready. "They're leaving peacefully." "Like hell they are. We've been tracking this war party for 2 days. They raided the Henderson place, killed 2 men and stole a dozen horses." Stone Bear's voice cut through the accusations like a blade. "We took no horses. We killed no one." "You calling me a liar, Chief?" The tension ratcheted higher. Catalina could see fingers tightening on triggers, could feel the moment spinning toward violence that would destroy everything she'd begun to build. That's when Running Wolf did something that changed everything. The boy slipped down from his father's horse and limped toward the sheriff's men, pulling something from his shirt. It was a silver locket, dented and tarnished. "This belonged to Mrs. Henderson," he said in careful English. "I found it where the real raiders dropped it." Morrison's face went pale. "Where did you get that?" "From the men who hunt us yesterday. The same men who wound me." Running Wolf's young voice carried surprising strength. "The same men who steal your cattle and blame us for their crimes." One of Morrison's deputies shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Sheriff, that's the locket Martha Henderson was wearing when we found her body." "Shut up, Collins," Morrison snapped. But the damage was done. Catalina saw the pieces falling into place. The cattle thieves who tried to raid Benjamin's herd, the mysterious Apache raids that always seemed to happen near ranches where Indian workers lived, the convenient timing of Stone Bear's arrival. "You've been working with the thieves," she said, the words coming out before she could stop them. "Giving them information about which ranches to hit, then blaming the Apache for the raids." Morrison's gun swung toward her. "You little half-breed witch, you don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Catalina felt a strange calm descend over her. "That's why you didn't want Benjamin to keep me. Not because you hate Indians, but because you were afraid I might figure out your game." The sheriff's face had gone from pale to red to something approaching purple. "You can't prove anything." "Maybe not," Stone Bear said quietly. "But I can." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a leather pouch that clinked with the sound of coins. Silver coins, freshly minted, the kind the territorial government used to pay lawmen. "We found this where the raiders camped last night," the Apache chief said, "along with deputy badges and a letter bearing your name." The world seemed to hold its breath. Then Morrison made the mistake that desperate men always make. He tried to shoot his way out of trouble. Morrison's gun blazed first, the shot echoing across the desert like thunder, but his aim was wild with panic and the bullet whined harmlessly into the sky. Stone Bear moved like liquid lightning, his war lance taking the sheriff in the shoulder and spinning him from his saddle before the man could fire again. Chaos erupted as deputies chose sides in the space of heartbeats. 2 of Morrison's men wheeled their horses and fled toward the hills, clearly part of the conspiracy and unwilling to face justice. 3 others threw down their weapons, hands raised in surrender, as they realized they'd been duped by their own leader. Deputy Collins, the youngest of the group, slid from his horse with tears streaming down his face. "We didn't know, Stone Bear. I swear on my mother's grave. We thought you were the ones raiding the ranches." Benjamin kept his rifle trained on Morrison, who writhed in the dirt clutching his wounded shoulder. "How long has this been going on?" "6 months, Collins said miserably. "Maybe longer." Morrison said he had special information about Apache movements, said we needed to patrol certain areas. We never questioned it. Stone Bear dismounted and retrieved his lance, cleaning Morrison's blood from the carved point with casual efficiency. "Your sheriff has been selling information to the cattle thieves. They raid the ranches, steal what they want. Then Morrison blames us for the crimes." "But why?" Catalina asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Morrison glared up at her through pain-clouded eyes. "Because people like you don't belong here. Mixed breeds, Apache lovers, Indian sympathizers. You're all a disease that needs to be cut out." His words hit like physical blows, but Catalina stood her ground. "So you decided to start a war to get rid of us? Would have worked too, if Wade hadn't gone soft and taken you in." Benjamin's jaw tightened. "Maybe it's time you learned what real justice looks like." But Stone Bear held up a hand. "This man's fate is not ours to decide. He has broken white man's law as well as Apache law. Let both peoples judge him." The wisdom of this decision became clear as more riders approached from multiple directions. Word of the confrontation had spread, and concerned ranchers were converging on the Wade homestead. Among them, Catalina was surprised to see several faces she recognized. Mexican traders, Apache scouts working for the territorial government, even some of the mixed-blood families who usually kept to themselves. Old Pete Gonzalez, a Mexican rancher whose spread bordered Benjamin's land, was the first to reach them. His weathered face was grim as he surveyed the scene. "Morrison finally showed his true colors?" Pete asked. "You knew," Benjamin demanded. "Suspected for months. Too many raids happening right after Morrison's patrols went through. Too convenient." Pete spat in the dust near the wounded sheriff. "But proving it and surviving long enough to tell about it are different things." More arrivals brought more pieces of the puzzle. Maria Santos, a mixed-blood woman who ran the general store in town, had noticed Morrison's men buying supplies that didn't match their official patrol routes. Tom Whitehorse, an Apache scout, had found evidence of white men camping in sacred places where no honest lawman would go. The picture that emerged was of a carefully planned conspiracy designed to drive non-white settlers from the territory while enriching Morrison and his criminal partners. The stolen cattle were being sold in Mexico, the profits split between the thieves and corrupt lawmen. "How many people knew the truth?" Catalina asked. "More than you'd think," Maria Santos replied. "But knowing and being able to act on it are different things. Morrison had too much power, too many friends in high places." "What changed?" Benjamin wanted to know. Stone Bear answered, "You did. When you chose to protect the girl despite the risks, you proved that not all white men are enemies. Others began to find courage in your example." The compliment made Benjamin uncomfortable, but Catalina felt a warm glow of pride. Her presence here hadn't brought disaster, it had brought truth to light. As the sun climbed higher, an impromptu court formed in the yard of the Wade homestead. Ranchers, traders, Apache, Mexican families, and mixed-blood settlers all gathered to bear witness, as evidence was presented against Morrison and his co-conspirators. The wounded sheriff's guilt was undeniable. Too many people had too many pieces of the puzzle for him to talk his way out of trouble. When faced with certain conviction, even some of his own men turned against him, revealing the full scope of the criminal operation. "What happens now?" Running Wolf asked his father. Stone Bear looked around at the diverse group of people who had come together in the name of justice. Now we learned to live like neighbors instead of enemies. It wasn't going to be easy. Years of suspicion and hatred couldn't be erased in a single day. But as Catalina watched former enemies working together to right old wrongs, she began to believe that change was possible. Deputy Collins, now the senior law enforcement officer present, formally arrested Morrison and his remaining conspirators. The stolen cattle would be returned to their rightful owners. The Apache band would receive compensation for false accusations and harassment. But perhaps most importantly, the various communities represented in Benjamin's yard began talking to each other. Really talking for the first time in years. You know what this means? Benjamin said quietly to Catalina as they watched the impromptu peace conference unfold. What? It means you're stuck with me. Can't very well send you away now that you've become a local hero. Catalina smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. Is that what I am? That's what you've always been. Just took the rest of us a while to catch up. As the afternoon wore on and plans were made for healing the rifts Morrison had created, Catalina found herself thinking about identity and belonging. She was Apache and Mexican and adopted daughter all at once. She was part of multiple communities that had learned to see her not as a threat, but as a bridge between worlds. For the first time in her life, she didn't have to choose which part of herself to be. She could be all of it completely and without apology. The realization was both liberating and terrifying, because now that she truly belonged somewhere, she had everything to lose. The territorial judge arrived like a storm cloud, his black carriage kicking up dust that settled on everything like a curse. Judge Cornelius Blackwood stepped down from his fancy coach, his expensive clothes and cold eyes marking him as a man who'd never missed a meal or questioned his own importance. Catalina watched from the kitchen window as he surveyed the Wade homestead with obvious disgust. Behind him came two lawyers in equally fine clothes, their pale faces already red from the desert heat. "This doesn't look good," Benjamin muttered, joining her at the window. 3 weeks had passed since Morrison's arrest, 3 weeks of relative peace as the various communities worked together to heal old wounds. But Catalina had learned not to trust peace. It was usually just the quiet before the next storm. Judge Blackwood's voice carried across the yard like a whip crack. "Mr. Wade, present yourself immediately." Benjamin squared his shoulders and walked outside, Catalina close behind him despite his gesture for her to stay inside. She'd spent too many years having her fate decided by men in fancy clothes while she hid in back rooms. "Your Honor," Benjamin said respectfully. "Welcome to my home." "Home?" Blackwood's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "This primitive settlement barely qualifies as a dwelling. I'm here on urgent territorial business regarding the recent unpleasantness." One of the lawyers, a thin man with nervous eyes, cleared his throat. "Your Honor, perhaps we should discuss this matter in private." "Nonsense, Harrison. The girl should hear what's at stake." Blackwood's pale eyes fixed on Catalina like a snake watching a mouse. "Young lady, I've reviewed your case files. Most disturbing reading." Catalina's stomach dropped. Case files meant official records, and official records meant someone with power was taking an interest in her situation. "What case files?" Benjamin demanded. "Adoption records, custody transfers, complaints filed by previous guardians." Blackwood pulled a leather folder from his coat. "It seems Miss Santos here has been quite the problem child." The old name hit Catalina like a slap. She'd begun thinking of herself as Catalina Wade, had started to believe that identity was real and permanent. "Her name is Catalina Wade," Benjamin said firmly. "I have legal adoption papers." "Ah yes, those papers." Blackwood's smile was cold as winter wind. "Filed hastily, without proper investigation or waiting periods. Highly irregular." Harrison, the nervous lawyer, stepped forward. "The court has received a formal petition challenging the adoption on grounds of cultural incompatibility." "What does that mean?" Catalina asked, though she suspected she already knew. "It means," Blackwood said with obvious satisfaction, "that certain concerned citizens believe you would be better served in an institution designed for children of mixed heritage." The words felt like ice water in her veins. Institution. She'd heard whispers of such places, schools that were really prisons, where they tried to cure children of their Indian blood through beatings and starvation and worse. Who filed this petition? Benjamin's voice was deadly quiet. That information is confidential. But I can tell you the petitioners have significant influence in territorial affairs. Catalina didn't need to guess. The surviving members of Morrison's conspiracy, the ranchers and businessmen who'd profited from the cattle rustling scheme, were striking back the only way they could, through the courts. The girl has done nothing wrong, Benjamin said. Perhaps not recently, but her record shows a pattern of defiance, of cultural confusion that makes her unsuitable for placement in a Christian home. Blackwood consulted his papers. Running away, speaking in savage tongues, consorting with hostile Indians, helping a wounded child and preventing a range war, Catalina interrupted. If that's defiance, I'm proud to be defiant. The judge's face darkened. Your attitude merely confirms our concerns. You've been poisoned by primitive influences, filled with ideas above your proper station. And what is my proper station? She asked, anger burning away fear. As a ward of the territorial government, placed where you can receive proper moral guidance and useful training. Benjamin stepped between them. Over my dead body. That can be arranged, Harrison said quietly, then flushed when he realized he'd spoken aloud. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a grass fire. These men weren't just trying to take Catalina away. They were threatening Benjamin's life if he interfered. I have rights, Benjamin said. Legal rights as her adoptive father. Rights that can be revoked if the court determines you're an unfit guardian. Blackwood smiled. Living in isolation with an impressionable girl, no proper female supervision, allowing her to associate with known hostiles. The evidence writes itself. Catalina felt the walls closing in around her, the familiar pattern of rejection and disposal beginning again. But this time was different. This time she wasn't powerless. I want to speak for myself, she said firmly. Children don't speak in territorial court, Blackwood replied dismissively. Half-breed children especially, Harrison added with a sneer. The insult was a mistake. It reminded everyone present, including the growing crowd of neighbors who'd gathered to watch the proceedings, exactly what this was really about. Stone Bear emerged from the group of onlookers, his war paint replaced by the simpler dress of a man conducting business rather than war. But his presence still commanded respect. In Apache law, he said quietly, children speak for themselves when they reach the age of choosing. This girl has proven her wisdom in crisis. Apache law has no standing in territorial court, Blackwood snapped. And territorial law has no standing on Apache land, Stone Bear replied smoothly. Which raises an interesting question about jurisdiction. The judge's confidence wavered slightly. What do you mean? I mean this girl is my cousin's daughter, blood of my blood. By Apache law, that makes her part of our nation. By treaty law, that gives her certain protections. It was a bluff, but a brilliant one. The territorial government walked a careful line with the Apache tribes, and any suggestion of treaty violations would bring federal investigators swarming like angry wasps. Harrison whispered urgently in Blackwood's ear, but the judge waved him away impatiently. Treaty rights don't apply to half-breeds living in white society, he declared. They do if the half-breed chooses to live in Apache society, Stone Bear countered. All eyes turned to Catalina. Once again, she stood at the crossroads between worlds, forced to choose which part of herself to embrace. But this time she had an idea. I choose neither, she said clearly. I choose both. That's impossible, Blackwood sputtered. Is it? Old Pete Gonzalez spoke up from the crowd. Seems to me the girl's proven she can bridge different worlds. Maybe that's exactly what this territory needs. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathered neighbors. Apache and Mexican and mixed-blood families who'd all found common ground in recent weeks. The law doesn't recognize such arrangements, Harrison protested. Then maybe it's time to change the law, Benjamin said quietly. The simple statement hit like lightning. Change the law. Challenge the system that kept people in neat little boxes, that said you had to be one thing or another but never both. You're talking about revolution, Blackwood said. his voice shaking with outrage. "I'm talking about justice," Benjamin replied. "And if that seems revolutionary to you, maybe you should ask yourself why." As the confrontation intensified, Catalina realized something important was happening. The judge and his lawyers represented the old way of thinking, the rigid system that saw difference as dangerous. But the people gathered in Benjamin's yard represented something new. A community where difference was strength, where bridges mattered more than walls. The question was, which vision would prevail? A gunshot shattered the tense standoff, but the bullet came from an unexpected direction. One of Judge Blackwood's own guards had fired into the air, his face pale with fear as he pointed toward the eastern hills. "Riders coming fast," he shouted. "Maybe 20 men, armed and moving like they mean business." Catalina's heart lurched as she recognized the dust cloud on the horizon. These weren't random travelers or curious neighbors. They moved with military precision, their formation speaking of serious intent. "Federal marshals," Harrison breathed, consulting a pocket watch with shaking hands. "They're early." Benjamin turned sharply toward the nervous lawyer. "You called in federal marshals?" "Insurance," Blackwood said stiffly. "This matter involves territorial law, treaty rights, and potential civil unrest. The federal government has interests." The approaching riders resolved into clarity as they drew nearer, uniformed men led by a stern-faced marshal whose silver badge caught the sunlight like a star. Behind him rode a mixed group of cavalry soldiers and territorial officials, their presence transforming the homestead gathering into something far more serious. Marshal James Crawford dismounted with the efficiency of a man accustomed to bringing order to chaos. His weathered face swept the crowd, taking in the mix of Apache, Mexican, and white faces with eyes that missed nothing. "Judge Blackwood," he said formally, "I received your telegram about a potential treaty violation." "Marshal Crawford, thank goodness you're here. We have a half-breed girl making spurious claims about Apache citizenship, threatening the stability of territorial law." Crawford's gaze found Catalina, studied her for a long moment. "You're the girl in question?" "I'm Catalina Wade," she said, letting both names ring with equal pride. "Daughter of Broken Arrow and Maria Santos, adopted daughter of Benjamin Wade, cousin to Stone Bear. And which of those identities do you claim for legal purposes?" The question everyone had been dancing around, stated with federal authority. Catalina felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. Not just her own future, but the future of everyone who didn't fit neatly into the law's narrow categories. "All of them," she said quietly. "I am all of those things, and I shouldn't have to choose which part of myself to sacrifice for other people's comfort." Crawford nodded slowly, as if her answer confirmed something he'd already suspected. "Judge Blackwood, you've created quite a mess here." "Mess?" Blackwood sputtered. "Marshal, this girl is clearly confused about her legal status. She needs proper guidance, institutional care." "What she needs," Crawford interrupted, "is for adults to stop using her as a weapon in their own political battles." The marshal's words hit like cold water on a fire. He pulled a thick folder from his saddlebags, documents that clearly carried more authority than anything Blackwood had brought. "I've spent the last 3 weeks investigating the Morrison affair," Crawford continued. "Cattle rustling, corruption, false accusations against the Apache tribes. Quite a web of criminal activity." Stone Bear stepped forward. "We have been patient while your law sorts out the crimes committed against our people. And your patience is appreciated, Chief Stone Bear. The federal government recognizes that territorial officials have exceeded their authority in several instances." Blackwood's face went white. "Marshal, surely you're not suggesting that territorial courts lack jurisdiction in this matter?" "I'm not suggesting it, Judge. I'm stating it directly." Crawford opened his folder, consulting official documents. "This case involves federal treaty obligations, civil rights under the 14th Amendment, and criminal conspiracy spanning multiple territories." The crowd stirred as the implications became clear. Federal intervention meant territorial politics wouldn't decide Catalina's fate. Higher authorities would make that determination. "What does that mean for the girl?" Benjamin asked. Crawford smiled for the first time since his arrival. It means, Mr. Wade, that your adoption papers are valid under federal law. Judge Blackwood lacks authority to overturn them. Relief flooded through Catalina like warm honey, but Crawford held up a hand before anyone could celebrate. However, there are broader questions at stake here. Questions about how the federal government addresses the rights of mixed heritage individuals in territorial expansion. He gestured toward the diverse crowd gathered in Benjamin's yard. What I see here is a community that's found ways to bridge cultural divides, to solve problems through cooperation rather than conflict. That's exactly what the federal government needs to see more of. Old Pete Gonzalez cleared his throat. Marshall, you saying the government might actually listen to folks like us? I'm saying the government is tired of sending troops to clean up messes created by local prejudice and corruption. Communities that can govern themselves peacefully get more autonomy. Communities that can't. He shrugged meaningfully. The message was clear. Work together or face continued federal oversight. Judge Blackwood made one last desperate attempt to assert his authority. This is highly irregular, Marshall. You can't simply override territorial law based on some romantic notion of cultural harmony. I can and I am, Crawford replied. Effective immediately, this district falls under federal oversight pending investigation of the Morrison conspiracy. Your court's jurisdiction is suspended. The judge's face cycled through several shades of red before settling on an unhealthy purple. This is outrageous. I'll appeal to Washington immediately. You do that, Judge. I'm sure they'll be very interested in your correspondence with Morrison and his associates. Blackwood went pale as flour, clearly realizing that his own involvement in the conspiracy might be deeper than he'd hoped to conceal. Without another word, he stalked to his carriage, Harrison scurrying behind him like a nervous dog. As the judge's entourage departed in a cloud of dust and wounded dignity, Crawford turned his attention back to the gathered community. Now then, let's talk about the future. The federal government is prepared to establish this district as a model for territorial integration, if you can prove you're capable of self-governance. Stone Bear and Benjamin exchanged glances. What would that involve? Benjamin asked. Local council with representatives from all communities, shared law enforcement, cooperative economic development, and he looked directly at Catalina. Protection for individuals who don't fit traditional categories. It was more than Catalina had dared hope for, not just acceptance for herself, but a chance to create a place where others like her could belong without having to choose between different parts of their identity. There's one condition, Crawford added. This experiment succeeds or fails based on results. Any return to the old conflicts, any hint of the corruption we've just cleaned up, and federal control becomes permanent. The marshal remounted his horse, preparing to depart. Oh, and Miss Wade? The federal government recognizes your unique position as a bridge between communities. There might be opportunities for someone with your skills as this territory develops. As Crawford and his men rode away, Catalina found herself surrounded by the people who'd become her extended family. Benjamin and Stone Bear, Pete Gonzalez and Maria Santos, Running Wolf and Tom Whitehorse, and dozens of others who'd chosen cooperation over conflict. So, Benjamin said quietly, what do you think? Ready to help build something new? Catalina looked around at the faces of every color and heritage, united not by sameness but by shared commitment to something better than what had come before. I think, she said with a smile that came from the deepest part of her heart, that I'm exactly where I belong. For the first time in her life, she didn't have to choose which part of herself to be. She could be all of it completely and without apology, in a place that valued bridges more than walls. The girl who'd been sold 3 times for the color of her skin had finally found something that couldn't be bought or sold. A home where her worth was measured not by other people's prejudices, but by her own courage to be exactly who she was meant to be. The wagon wheels of the Henley family squeaked like dying birds as they pulled up to the Wade homestead, their familiar sound making Catalina's stomach twist with old memories. But this time, she wasn't the frightened cargo being delivered. She was standing on her own porch, watching as another broken child huddled between Martha and Jacob like a wounded animal. Benjamin, Jacob called out with false cheer. Heard you might be looking for more help around here. 6 months had passed since Marshall Crawford's intervention. 6 months of building the kind of community that existed nowhere else in the territory. The sight of the Henleys' wagon felt like a snake slithering into paradise. The child between them couldn't be more than 12, her dark hair marking her as another victim of the territory's complex racial politics. Their eyes met across the yard, and Catalina saw her own past reflected there. The wariness of someone who'd learned that hope was dangerous, that adults were not to be trusted. Benjamin emerged from the barn, his face going hard when he recognized the visitors. Jacob, Martha, what brings you out here? Business opportunity, Martha said, her voice carrying that same calculating tone Catalina remembered so well. This little one needs proper placement, and we thought of you first. The casual cruelty of it, calling a child a business opportunity, made Catalina's hands clench into fists. She stepped forward, studying the girl more closely. What's her name? She asked. Elena something, Jacob waved dismissively. Mexican father, probably Pima mother. You know how these things go. The girl's chin lifted slightly at hearing her name pronounced correctly, and Catalina caught a spark of defiance that hadn't been completely crushed yet. Good. Broken spirits were harder to heal. How much? Benjamin asked, his voice flat. Well, she's younger than the last one, more trainable. $50 seems fair. Catalina watched Elena's face crumple slightly at being discussed like livestock. The familiar shame, the desperate hope warring with learned despair. She knew those feelings like old scars. Actually, Catalina said, stepping off the porch, we do need help, but not the kind you're thinking of. She walked directly to the wagon and looked up at Elena. My name is Catalina Wade. Would you like to come inside and have something to eat while the grown-ups talk? Elena's eyes widened at being addressed directly, at being offered choice instead of simply being transferred like property. She nodded mutely. Now wait just a minute, Martha protested. We haven't completed our business yet. The business is completed, Benjamin said firmly, pulling out his money pouch. But not as a purchase, as an adoption. The word hit like lightning. Jacob's mouth fell open, while Martha's face cycled through surprise, anger, and calculation. Adoption? Benjamin, you can't be serious. You don't know anything about this child's background, her bloodlines. I know enough, he interrupted. I know she needs a home, and we have one to offer. As the paperwork was completed, real adoption papers, filed properly with the territorial government, Catalina took Elena inside to clean up and eat. The girl moved like someone expecting punishment at any moment, her shoulders hunched defensively. Are you really going to keep me? Elena asked quietly as Catalina set a bowl of stew before her. Do you want to be kept? It was the same question Benjamin had asked her, and Elena's reaction was identical. Shock that her preference mattered to anyone. I don't know. The other families always said I was too much trouble. What kind of trouble? Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. I dream in Spanish. I remember my real mother's songs. I ask too many questions. Catalina smiled, remembering her own crimes against respectability. Those aren't troubles, Elena. Those are gifts. Through the window, she could see Benjamin completing the legal arrangements while the Henleys counted their money with obvious dissatisfaction. $50 for a quick adoption was far less than they'd hoped to extract through years of rental agreements. That evening, as Elena settled into the small bedroom Benjamin had hastily prepared, Catalina found herself thinking about cycles, how pain could reproduce itself endlessly, or how healing could spread like ripples in still water. She reminds me of someone, Benjamin said, joining her on the porch. Who? You 6 months ago. Scared, suspicious, ready to run at the first sign of rejection. Catalina considered this. I was more angry than scared. Were you? Because from where I sat, you looked terrified most of the time. The observation stung because it was true. Beneath all her defiance had been bone-deep fear. Fear of abandonment, of never being enough, of proving all the cruel voices right. How do we help her? She asked. Same way we helped you. Patience, consistency, and time. But even as he spoke, Catalina sensed something different about Elena's situation. The girl's wariness went deeper than simple abandonment. There was something specific haunting her dark eyes. 3 days later, the truth emerged during a thunderstorm that sent Elena into panic so complete she couldn't breathe. Catalina found her cowering in the corner of her room, sobbing words in Spanish too rapid to follow. "Elena, what's wrong? It's just rain." "The soldiers," Elena gasped. "The soldiers came in the rain. They burned everything. Mama tried to hide me, but they found us anyway." The story came out in fragments over the following weeks. Elena's village had been attacked by rogue cavalry soldiers looking for hostiles to blame for missing supply trains. Her parents had been killed, her baby brother lost in the chaos. She'd survived by playing dead among the bodies until Mexican traders found her days later. The Henleys had rescued her from the traders, promising to find her a good Christian home. Instead, they'd kept her as unpaid labor for over a year before deciding she was too traumatized to be useful. "No wonder she flinches at loud noises," Benjamin said after hearing the full account. "That child's seen horrors no one should witness." Catalina felt a fierce protectiveness rise in her chest. Elena's trauma was different from her own, but the result was the same. A young person convinced she was worthless, unwanted, fundamentally broken. "We need help," she told Benjamin. "Professional help." The nearest doctor was 3 days' ride away in Tucson, but Stone Bear had other suggestions. Apache healers understood trauma in ways white medicine was only beginning to explore. They knew how to help spirits damaged by violence and loss. The healing ceremony took place under the full moon, with Elena seated between Catalina and an elderly Apache woman named Grandmother Willow. The rituals were gentle but powerful. Singing, smoke, stories that helped wounded spirits find their way back to peace. Elena didn't speak Apache, but healing transcended language. As the old woman's voice rose and fell like wind through canyon walls, some of the terrible tension began to leave the girl's shoulders. "She says your pain has a name now," Catalina translated as Grandmother Willow spoke. "And when pain has a name, it can be healed. It would take time. Months, maybe years, but Elena was beginning the journey back from the edge of despair. And in helping her heal, Catalina discovered something about herself. Her own journey from victim to survivor had given her tools to help others walk the same difficult path. "You're good at this," Benjamin observed as they watched Elena laugh at something Running Wolf had said. The Apache boy had become her unofficial big brother, teaching her games that helped her trust again. At what? Healing, building bridges, helping people find their way home. Catalina looked around at the diverse group gathered in their yard. Apache and Mexican and mixed blood families. White settlers who'd learned to see past color. Children playing together regardless of heritage. This was what community looked like when people chose love over fear. "Maybe that's my purpose," she said thoughtfully. "Not to fit into someone else's idea of who I should be, but to help create spaces where people can be whoever they truly are." The realization felt like sunrise after the longest night. She'd spent so many years trying to become acceptable to others that she'd never considered the possibility of making the world more accepting instead. But first, Elena needed to heal. And there were other children out there, other victims of prejudice and violence who needed what this community was building. 1 year later, Catalina stood in the doorway of their expanded house and watched the most beautiful chaos she'd ever seen. 12 children of every possible heritage playing together in the yard, while their new families shared coffee and conversation on the long porch Benjamin had built to accommodate their growing community. Elena was teaching the youngest ones a Mexican singing game, her voice clear and confident, as she led them through the steps their mothers and grandmothers had once taught them. The trauma was still there, probably always would be, but it no longer defined her. "Hard to believe it all started with one scared girl and one lonely widower," said Maria Santos, the mixed-blood woman who'd become something like a grandmother to their ever-expanding family. "Didn't start there," Catalina replied, watching Stone Bear help little Tommy Chun, the newest arrival, fashion a toy from carved wood. "Started with people deciding to see worth instead of problems." The Wade homestead had become something unprecedented in the territory, a place where unwanted children found families who celebrated rather than tolerated their differences. Word had spread through networks of traders, missionaries, and tribal connections, bringing children and families together across traditional boundaries. Not every story was happy. Some children were too damaged to heal completely. Some families couldn't adjust to the complexity of cross-cultural adoption. But more often than not, love found a way to bridge whatever gaps existed. Catalina, Benjamin called from the corral, where he was teaching Elena and 3 other children to handle cattle. Could you come translate? Miguel's horse is being stubborn, and I think we're having a language barrier. She grinned, walking over to help negotiate between a frustrated Mexican boy and an equally frustrated Apache pony. This was her life now. Constant translation, endless patience, the daily work of building understanding one conversation at a time. The federal government had taken notice. Marshal Crawford visited quarterly, documenting their success for reports that went all the way to Washington. Other territories were beginning to experiment with similar programs, though none had achieved quite the same level of integration. The secret, Crawford had told a delegation of territorial governors, isn't the programs or the policies, it's the people. Find someone who's been broken by the system, help them heal, and they become the best advocates for fixing what's broken. As afternoon faded into evening, the various families began gathering their children for the journey home to scattered ranches and settlements. The Wade homestead had become a weekly meeting place, a neutral ground where different communities could maintain connections and solve problems cooperatively. Miss Catalina, Elena said as the crowd thinned, do you think there are other places like this? What do you mean? Places where kids like us can belong, where families see strength instead of problems. Catalina considered the question carefully. Not yet, but there could be if enough people decide to build them. Elena's dark eyes grew thoughtful. Maybe when I'm grown up, I'll build one too. Maybe you will. As the last visitors departed and the homestead settled into peaceful evening quiet, Catalina found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. 2 years ago, she'd been property to be sold, a problem to be solved, a burden families reluctantly accepted until they could dispose of her again. Now she was Catalina Wade, daughter and sister and teacher and bridge builder. She was Apache and Mexican and adopted daughter all at once, and nobody questioned her right to be all of those things simultaneously. But perhaps most importantly, she was proof that worth couldn't be measured in silver coins or social acceptance, but in the simple, revolutionary act of choosing love over fear. Benjamin joined her on the porch, settling into the chair that had become his evening ritual. Penny for your thoughts. Just thinking about circles, she said. How everything that seems like an ending is really just another beginning. Deep thoughts for a young woman. I've had deep experiences for a young woman. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the western mountains. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes called to each other across the desert, their songs weaving together in harmonies that spoke of community, survival, and hope. Elena asked me something today, Catalina said eventually. What's that? If there could be more places like this. Places where children who don't fit traditional categories can find families who celebrate their differences instead of trying to erase them. Benjamin nodded slowly. What did you tell her? That there could be if enough people decided to build them. And what do you think? Are there enough people? Catalina smiled, thinking of all the unlikely connections they'd forged, all the former enemies who'd become allies, all the children who'd learned they were valuable exactly as they were. There are now, she said with quiet confidence. There are now. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Catalina Wade, daughter of 2 worlds, bridge between cultures, living proof that love transcends all artificial boundaries, knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The girl who'd been sold for the color of her skin had become a woman who built communities where color was celebrated as strength. The unwanted child had grown into someone who made sure no child would ever feel unwanted again. And in the end, that transformation from victim to healer, from burden to blessing, was worth more than all the silver coins in the territory. Because some things, love, family, belonging, worth, could never be bought or sold. They could only be freely given, received with gratitude, and passed on to others who needed to know they too had value beyond measure. In the distance, dust clouds announced another wagon approaching the homestead. Another family bringing another child who needed to learn they were worthy of love. Another opportunity to prove that kindness was stronger than prejudice, that hope could triumph over fear. Catalina Wade smiled and rose to meet them, ready to begin again the endless, beautiful work of building home for those who'd never had one.